watching or listening today. Much appreciated. And today I have a very, very special guest. This man, professional heavyweight boxer, standing 6 feet 6. He's a big guy. Current record, professional record: 21 wins, 14 knockouts, one loss by split decision. And also, this man currently holds the WBC USNBC silver heavyweight title as well. He's been in with some top opponents, actually switched from basketball early in his career to boxing, so we're going to talk about that. Got a lot to talk about today. But champ, that's enough of me talking about you in third person. I just want to say a big thank you for coming on, and obviously I appreciate you making the time.
You're welcome. No problem. Thank you for having me on.
Absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. So, starting at the beginning, at the time of this interview, it's only been, what's it been, 5 or 6 days since your last fight, split decision loss to George Arias, first loss of your career. And obviously, I know we've got a lot to talk about there, controversial loss as well. I just need to get that in there. So, obviously, you've had a few days to rest up, reflect, think about the fight. What are your thoughts on the fight? What reflections would you like to share with your fans about what went down with that fight?
I think he just had a solid game plan. He came in ready. He felt fresher than I did. You know what I'm saying? I thought I had a really good camp. It was a long camp because the fight got postponed a few times, and we just kept going. But I think that he was more active in spots. You know what I'm saying? At times he felt to be more active. And especially the last couple of seconds of the rounds, he would try to flurry and things like that. But I felt like I could have imposed my will more walking him down instead of trying to box him so much. So I think that's what the difference really was, is that he was a little bit more active. He wasn't really crazy active, like the first 230 of the rounds, he wasn't really throwing much, but he stuck with his game plan. He pretty much did the same thing the entire fight almost. And I think that's what the difference was in the split in the last judge's scorecard.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to just get a quick mention to that fight in. As I say, at the time of this interview, only been a few days. It's a shame to start with a downer. We'll be talking about a lot of good stuff as well. And obviously, we all know you'll bounce back from this, and there's more big wins on the horizon. But first of all, before we get into the future, I'm going to go back in time a little bit, because as many of the fans will know, you actually started out in basketball. You were an elite basketball player. So I just want to go back to there, just for anyone that doesn't know the story. Some people will, some people won't. And if we think back in time a little bit. Now, what was it initially that actually inspired you to switch, to change up from basketball to boxing? How did that happen in the beginning?
I think it was meant to happen. It was like one of those things where I always felt like maybe I was supposed to box, it's I understand it much more. Just from the standpoint of just it's one-on-one, you know. And another good thing was nobody did it in my family, so I didn't have to worry about trying to compete with anybody outside of me doing it. With basketball, it's a team sport, you know what I mean? And, everybody has to be clicking together, So I could always do well individually, but then, you also need the coaches to the team to do well. So as an individual, I always won awards and things. But the feeling of winning is harder, than it is in boxing in a sense, because you need everybody to be on the same page. With boxing, you kind of just learn your science individually, and you have to go by that, And the great fighters that learn it, they do well. You look at Tyson Fury, you wouldn't think that he's in the best shape, but he knows his body, he knows his science. So that's why he's able to do well. You look at Klitschko, same thing, So for me, it was like a no-brainer as far as the transition to go from basketball to boxing, because I always knew I was supposed to do it anyway. I grew up fighting anyway, so it wasn't like it wasn't like the hardest thing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's good to get into that transition. Now, a couple of things you mentioned there. First of all, you mentioned some great fighters just now, in the conversation. At that time when you decided to switch, or, maybe when you were growing up, were there some specific fighters that, really inspired you to want to do boxing for yourself? When obviously when you were playing basketball, but it sounds like you had your eye on boxing, you had your eye on the ring. So at that time, was there maybe one fight there, or maybe more than one that you like to watch on TV or whatever that actually inspired you to switch, or was it
I
something
would say
else?
I would say by far Muhammad Ali, and then Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield, Bernard Hopkins. Um, when I started to get into it, Floyd Mayweather. I really like the guys that really thought a lot. Thought, strategize and things like that. You know what I mean? I really like those guys because you could see it in the ring, sort of like them figuring stuff out. I really like that. But Winky Wright, I like Winky Wright. You know, it's just a lot of fighters. But I would say if you gave me two, I would definitely say Muhammad Ali and then Lennox. I think they were just like different, but they were really intelligent. You know what I mean in the ring, um, and they showed it with George Foreman as well.
Yeah, yeah, there's some good names there, very good names there. And you also mentioned very back, yeah. You also mentioned fighting growing up as well. Now, obviously, as I understand it, you were born and initially raised in Baltimore, Maryland, which is quite a notorious area. I mean, you think I've heard of that all the way over here in the UK, thousands of miles away. So it's definitely got that reputation. But what was your upbringing like there in terms of anything you'd like to share? I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be too personal, but just anything in terms of, did you fight in the street a lot? Is that something you were involved with from a young
Yeah,
age?
all the time. That was my thing. Was either fighting or playing basketball. But it was mainly because I was big for my age. So a lot of older kids would, try to bully me, things like that, and it end up with us fighting. So it was kind of normal though. It was normal for me back then. You know what I mean? I was the middle child, so I was a little bit of a wild cannon. You know what I mean? And um, the streets helped me, mature a little bit. So when I transitioned to Connecticut in high school, there were certain things that I already had done that I wasn't into because I already did them when I was young. So growing up and fighting in front of the neighborhood and fighting in front of a whole bunch of people, it didn't bother me. So even now, when I get in the ring, I'm never nervous. I'm never like, this is like a big moment. It's never like that. I would say maybe I overthink a little bit too much, like analyzing the whole thing, you know. But yeah, growing up, it was just basketball, fighting basketball. That's all I did. Play video games, but that's it.
Fair enough. Brilliant. Well, shortly we'll come back to your professional career with boxing, but obviously touching on your amateur career a little bit as well. Now, with this one, I don't really have one really narrow question about it, but one thing I am curious about is obviously that transitional time when you first transitioned from basketball to boxing. Do you have many memories from, say, your first amateur bout or maybe your first couple of amateur fights and how they went? I like to say, I don't have a really specific question, but anything that sticks in your memory now that you'd like to share with the fans from those early fights, those very, very early amateur fights that you had, the first couple maybe?
All right, I would say maybe I knew that I was supposed to do it because when I first started boxing, I won the amateur, I won the Golden Gloves as a novice, like right away, and I only had been training for like 4 or 5 months, but I beat guys that had more fights than me at the time. So I was like, oh, I really can do it. Like, it was different then too. I was much more like anxious. You know, I wasn't as calm, but I won all my pretty much my fights easily. And then when I fought Owen Minor, he beat me. He had like 30 something fights, but then he was schooling me at the same time. He was teaching me as time went on, and then we ended up fighting again, and I won. So I look back on my amateur career, and I'm like, this kind of feels like that in a sense. My last amateur fight, I lost to Jermaine Franklin, and then I went on like a crazy win streak. I didn't lose. I haven't lost since then. I won the PALs, I won the national PAL tournament and things like that. And I felt like um, I changed a few things. Like I just changed my mentality, my training a little bit, and that's how this feels a little bit. Like I'm disappointed, but I'm not like defeated. I'm not like, oh man, it's the end of the world. Like, all right, I know what to do now. Like, boom, I saw, okay, I know what to do. And that's what I just have to go do it.
Absolutely. And obviously with the name Cassius as well, I have to ask, switching over to boxing, was Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay, as his real name, an influence in your name, or was that just sort of a coincidence that you were called Cassius as well? What happened with that one, champ? Tell us what inspired your parents to give you that name.
I think Cassius Clay, well, Muhammad Ali was on the front cover of like People's Magazine or something at the time. And my dad just happened to be in a grocery store and he seen it and he just said, that's what I'm going to name him. I'm going to name him. And as I grew up, he used to call me, my nickname for my dad is Champ. And he used to say that all the time. And maybe not until like I started boxing, I started to really say, okay, I get why he's saying it. But it definitely was because of Cassius Clay, him being on the magazine. I think he just came back from a suspension and he was getting ready to fight Joe Frazier, maybe, I think. And my dad said, I'm going to name him that. And, that's what it was.
Incredible, incredible. So looking at the start of your professional career now, if we sort of jump to that, obviously you started off your professional career very well, with a second round knockout, I believe. I actually got the record here, just so we can look at everything. Then a points win, and there was quite a few knockouts early on in your career. You seem to transition into the pro game very well, but just sort of share with us a little bit, what it was like transitioning, obviously from the amateurs to the pro ranks, and sort of what you were going through at that time with those first couple of pro fights. Anything you'd like to share about that transition, please, champ?
I think the transition wasn't as hard as it seemed because I wasn't in the amateurs too long. And I wasn't like I came up watching the amateurs. I didn't when I came in, I was only amateur for 3 years, 4 years, and then I turned pro. So most of the fights I watched anyway were pro fights. So I learned from the amateurs because I got to see different styles. Um, Even now with sparring, I've got to see a bunch of styles and in sparring, you know what I mean? So I learned I learned a lot in transition to that. But I will say that in general, uh, it wasn't that big of a transition for me because my style in the amateurs was more of a pro based style, But I did learn that when you're getting ready for a fight as a pro, it's different from the amateurs. You need your time. You cannot play around with your time. Like for me, when I look at like a lot of the times I didn't get knockouts, is when I went and trained somewhere else with somebody and I come back and I'm trying to get ready for my fight. You can't do that. You need to focus on your fight and move on from there. Because if you're doing too much, you're taking away from your skill, and what you like to do. So that's one of the things I learned.
Yeah, it's brilliant to get an insight into that transition. Now, another thing, early on in your career, I'm soon we'll come back more to the present day, but you were also fighting in different locations as well. You had, when I was researching this, you had obviously some fights in Connecticut, you had the fights in Vegas, Canada, but you also came over to England at one time, early in your career, to fight over here. I think that was your fifth fight, wasn't it? Maybe the sixth. And what do you remember about that in terms of fighting in a different country, different location, quite early in your pro career? Do you have any memories about that, and like how you were received by the fans over here or anything like
Oh, the
that?
oh, the fans were great. I had my afro, and I was helping Tyson Fury. I was a little bit stubborn though. I probably shouldn't have did it because I was helping him for a fight, so it wasn't necessarily like I was getting what I needed. You know what I mean? It was just like I'd rather fight while I'm over here than sitting around and just sparring all day. You know what I mean? So I was a bit kind of stubborn into understanding like what goes into it. And I learned from that, but at the same time, it was just a great experience. Like I get to say I fought there before. I know what to expect. I know, some of the rules are different. Um, gloves are different. You know what I mean? So I can't be mad at it because I still fought. I won easily, and main events, did it for me. They made it happen.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, you're progressing to the pro ranks here as well. Coming up on a couple of key fights, before we get back to the present day. I also want to touch upon sparring. So actually, let's do that first. Let's talk about the sparring first because you mentioned obviously Tyson Fury. Now, I know that you sparred with some great guys, Luis Ortiz. You sparred with Huey Fury as well, I believe. And there's quite a few different, top guys. There's some big names that you've been doing rounds with. Obviously, over here in the UK and in America now, Tyson Fury is getting bigger and bigger as a name. I was working with him only a few days ago, actually, in an event. We had 1,100 people there. It was crazy. But I think a lot of people would like to hear about him and his style, how his style matched with your style, and things of that nature. So again, it's not a really narrow, specific question, but just anything you'd like to share about sparring with Fury and how your styles matched up would be great, please, champ.
It was cool. It was. I would say our styles are both are like awkward. You know what I mean? And this was Tyson Fury pre Wilder and pre Klitschko. So um, I think he respected me. You know what I mean? Because I was there to learn, and I wasn't letting him just bully me. He felt my presence, but I also feel like he is very smart in the ring. He's very like he's not really a busy active fighter, but he knows the time. Like he knows that 3 minutes in his head. He's looking. He's watching the clock. You know what I mean? And that's what it was for him. It was like a game in a game. So I think I would say I learned that the most. Like he's not taking it as serious. Like, oh, 3 minutes. I got to win all 3 minutes. He's taking it like I got to win spots, right? And then get out the round, win spots. So I would say that was something that I learned from him that was cool.
Okay. And let's talk about obviously Huey Fury, the other member of the Fury family that you've sparred with as well. Any reflections on that in terms of, anything you'd like to share about him and the same sort of thing, really, skill sets and just what he was like to work with and just anything that really, sticks in your mind, anything you really remember well about working with him.
I would say the same thing. I would say, but obviously he's smaller and he's different. He's not necessarily as you know, not I won't say precise, but technical. He's not as technically sound. But I would say that with Huey, he he got heart. You gotta give him his props. Like you gotta give him his props right there. He got heart. He's a world class guy. Um, his father has trained him. He's been with his dad for a long time, who's hard. You know what I mean? He's hard. He's hard on him. So I would say that you gotta give him his props. I would say stylistically, I think my style is awkward for Huey. It's a little bit different because I'm athletic, but I would say that with Huey, you gotta give him his props, even though he has what 3 or 4 losses. He still has made a lot of money and he's still world class, even though he had a couple of losses. Um, but you gotta give him props for his career and how he's trained with his dad, and his dad has been hard on him, and he's managed to pull through it. So you gotta give him props. You know what I mean? And that's how I feel about a lot of the UK guys. They're able to keep going and keep going because they get the support and the fan base is different. So you gotta give him props. You know what I mean? And you know, hopefully he can keep going and doing well.
Absolutely. And the last one to mention was sparring before we get back to a few more fights is obviously Luis Ortiz, you sparred with as well. Now, Luis Ortiz is a very skillful fighter. I know he gets a lot of, he seems to get a lot of hate on the internet for, being an old man and, I see these things that go around, but I do think he's, underrated. But obviously you sparred with him, so tell us any stories about that, what it was like working with him, sparring with him, maybe, share anything about his power or just anything that you remember from working with him, basically.
would say the main thing with working with him would be he's like the best teacher. Like he's probably like one of the best teachers I ever been around boxing. A boxer that can tell you like this is what you need to work on right away. Like he can look at you and tell like, all right, this is what you need to work on. You know what he remind me of? Like even though people, I don't understand like why people even talk about his age. It's the weirdest thing to me. It's like I
Yeah.
don't get it because Klitschko boxed until he's 40 and he was fighting Joshua. You know what I'm saying? Like it's the weirdest thing to me. The thing with Ortiz, I would say, not even trying to be funny. He's like he's cerebral, like he's like a LeBron, but for boxing. Because like he can look at something and be like, yo, that's how you supposed to boom boom boom, you know? Or that's how you supposed to do this. Like if he ever were to get into coaching, which I don't know if he would or wouldn't, because his personality is so cool. But if he was, it would be like boom, 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 like right away. He could pick it up. He like maybe like Floyd Mayweather. Like they understand every little inch of the sport. So I would say the teaching probably, was really, really sharp, really good for me.
Incredible. Good, yeah, it's good to get an insight into those because I like to touch on things that the fans, don't see from the outside because obviously they don't see the sparring and what some of these guys are really like. So that's brilliant. Now, obviously, touching on a couple of key fights here. One of them being where you won the WBC silver title, USMBC, which I mentioned briefly earlier. Now, obviously, that's a great win, getting your first professional title against Nick Jones as well. I believe that was a third round knockout or fourth. I think it was third. So with him, let's just talk about that in terms of people talk about fights specifically when people win titles, but I'm more curious as to how it felt to you in terms of to win a belt like that on your way up to the rankings and everything. What goes through your mind in a moment like that when you win your first professional title? How does it feel?
I felt good, but at the same time, I also knew that eventually I was going to get to him in a fight,
Mhm.
but that's one of the fights that after this past fight, I look back on and I'm like, that's some of the same things I should have did because it was there. Like I should have just walked them down, like forget, and it was there. That's one of the fights that I look back on and I'm like, that was a turning corner for me, so to speak. Um, but you can't cry over spilled milk. I still won the title. I did what I had to do that fight, and it felt good.
Brilliant. So before we come to the future again, because I do want to come to the future and how you're going to bounce back and who you'll fight next, I want to touch on one other fight as well. When you fought Chancellor Welliver, if I think I always get his first name wrong, but very, very experienced fighter who's had, I think, over 70 fights now. But at the time you had him, I know he had 57 wins, 12 losses. I think he had a few draws in there. Very, very experienced guy. But you got him out of there quite early in the fight. The fourth round, I think. So with that one, just because I know he's quite a popular fighter, in the heavyweight division. What do you remember about that win, in terms of how that went down and how you got him out of there early? Did you expect to get him out of there as early as you did?
I thought I was going to get him out of there earlier because he was so big, yo. Like he was like 280. He was a big dude, but I did think I would get him out of there earlier. But Herman had told me beforehand, who I was my trainer at the time. He had said, man, he could take punches. He's experienced. He's a big guy, so don't try to gas him out. And I still try to knock him out early, and I was like, whoa, like I mean, you talk about a fight in which I felt like my hand is going through the gloves. I would say that and he took him, and then I whacked him hard on his arm, and I remember him grimacing because I just threw as hard as I could at one point, and I said I'm just gonna stay there, and then I was able to get the stoppage, but he was tough, man. I wouldn't like be honest, I wouldn't want to fight him no more. Like I wouldn't want to fight nobody like that again. You know what I mean? Like I mean, if I had to work on stuff, maybe, but just to do it, nah, I'm good.
Fair enough. That's cool. That's cool. You mentioned at the beginning that you're a big fan of fighters, that are thinking fighters, they're technical people, and it gets in there and it's like a chess game. And you mentioned a few individuals earlier on. Now, in your career, out of the people you fought in terms of technical ability, in the fights you've been in so far, who would you say has been like the most technically gifted, the most where you're in a fight and you're thinking about it, like a chess game, what's he going to do next? Is there anyone, maybe there's one guy, maybe there's more than one guy, but who comes to mind for that type of thing out of your fight so far?
Probably Sean Down Winters. I
Okay,
would say
yeah,
him. I would say him because he came into my fight with a lot of experience that I didn't have, and he also came into my fight with knowing and understanding like you know you can't go right at me. Like you can't just run right at me and try to think that you're gonna overwhelm me because you right there for me to hit you. So he came into the fight and he delayed a lot. And I think George Arias did the same thing, so to speak. He delayed a lot, and they kind of just try to frustrate me. So I would say both of them. I would say both of them in different ways, but they had the same game plan. It was similar, but different.
yeah. And one that always comes up here for pretty much every interview I do, more or less, is obviously the hardest hitters because, the fans, they always want to hear about, who hit the hardest and all that sort of thing. So out of the guys you fought so far, who was the hardest puncher that you were in there with? Maybe there's one guy, maybe there's more than one guy. Who comes to mind for that one, champ?
Hardest puncher. Um, I would probably say maybe John Bowden probably was like the awkwardly hardest puncher. It
Yeah.
wasn't it wasn't as it wasn't crazy. It wasn't hard like boom thumping. But I would say John Bowden maybe because he did drop me. But it wasn't after I got dropped. It was like my body was warmed up. So I don't know. That's a good question. But I would say him. I would give him his props. You know,
Incredible. And
I
the
would give him
last
his
couple
props.
of things, because I know we've obviously with this with time we've gone on longer than I thought, but in a good way because we've gone into some good stuff. But the last couple of things I have for you is obviously we come back to the future now, because we touched on this at the beginning. After this situation with George Arias and everything that happened there, obviously I think I speak for fans, boxing fans all over the place when we're all looking forward to seeing you back in the ring now. I know it's only been a few days. But in terms of your future plans and bouncing back from this and getting some more big fights and everything of that nature, what are your plans now? Is there anyone specific that you'd like to fight next? What are you sort of aiming for from here?
Well, it's the same thing for me. Like I don't really look at anybody specifically and say I want to fight him next. I just look at it like we see what happens, whatever is available. I want to get back in the ring just to see, you know, what was going on, maybe, just to feel myself a little bit, and then go right back to TV or something in March. So we'll see what's out there and what kind of shows are coming up. But more importantly for me, it's just about going back and correcting some of the things that I felt I need to correct, and taking more control over my what I can control. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah,
um, and getting better from it. Queen got to BX.
cool. And obviously, I believe some of the best fights for you are yet to come, and definitely there's some big ones on the horizon. But you've accomplished a lot, so you're in a good position to give advice to young fighters coming up. Like is in they maybe they're in the amateurs or they're just turning pro or whatever. What would be sort of two or three pieces of advice that you give to them? Like if there's young fighters out there watching this, listening to this, or whatever, and they want to do well in the game, like I say, you're on the up and up. You've accomplished a lot. So, if any of them were looking to you for advice, though, what would be maybe two or three things you'd say to them that are really important?
I would say, one, believe in yourself, but two, I would say, especially be coachable, but remember that is your career. Is about your science. Everybody's bodies, everybody's skills are different. So it's about enhancing yourself, but be coachable, be be somebody that can take criticism, but you have to be able to, understand that it's your career and you have to make the best decisions for you. So that's what I would say, first and foremost.
So good advice there, champ. Really good to to give back to them. And the last question I have for you really is obviously for your fans and your supporters out there, and those people who follow your career and support your career, and the genuine ones now. I mean, I'm not talking about the people that sort of come and go, but the ones that sort of loyally and they're solid and they stick by you. Any of them are watching this or listening to this, what would you say to them? What would your words for your fans and your supporters be?
Oh, of course. Thank you. Of course, first of all, I want to thank God, but I want to thank them especially because, I have support that, they're going to give me advice. They're going to give me the real and they're going to listen to some of the, things that I have to speak about. So, I'm super thankful for them and I'm appreciative. Yep. DS right here.
Awesome, champ. Well, I just want to say, obviously, once again, a big thank you for your time, and
Thank you, man. Thank you.
it's been a pleasure. And we've gone in depth, and we've got talked about all sorts of stuff. So I'm very grateful for that, champ. And all I'll say now is God bless and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll
Okay,
send
thank
you.
you, brother.
No worries. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.